My mother called me dramatic. That was her favorite word for me. Dramatic. Whenever I pointed out something that wasn't fair, and standing in my own living room holding a document my parents had printed out and brought to my house uninvited, I heard that word one more time. You're being so dramatic, Sarah. The document was a deed transfer from my house, the house I had saved for 6 years to buy, the house with my name on the mortgage, my signature on every paper, my credit score that I had rebuilt from nothing after years of financial struggle. They wanted me to sign it over to my brother, Kyle, as a family gift. They had already filled in his name on the line. I wasn't dramatic. I was done. But let me start from the beginning, because this story doesn't start in my living room. It starts about 20 years earlier, in a small house in Ohio, where I learned very quickly that in my family, the rules were different depending on who you were. I am the oldest of 3. I have a younger sister, Dana, and then Kyle, the youngest, the only boy, and from the moment he was born, the entire atmosphere of our household shifted. I was 7 years old when my mother looked at my father in the hospital and said, finally. I didn't understand it then. I understood it completely by the time I was 12. Kyle got the bigger bedroom when we moved to a new house, even though I was older. Kyle got a car on his 16th birthday. I got a handshake from my dad and a "you'll figure it out" when I turned 16 and asked about getting to my after-school job. Kyle's grades never mattered. Mine were inspected like evidence. I got a B+ in junior year chemistry, and my mother sat me down at the kitchen table and told me I needed to take it more seriously. I worked. That was what I did. I worked after school, I worked summers, I paid for my own prom dress, my own senior trip, my own application fees. My parents contributed nothing to my college tuition and told me it was because they just didn't have it. The following year, they paid for Kyle's first semester at a school out of state. The year after that, they bought him a laptop and a new set of furniture for his dorm room. I didn't ask for an explanation. I already knew. I graduated college with student loans and a job offer in Cincinnati. I moved out the week after graduation. My mother cried. My father told me I was being hasty. Kyle asked if he could have my old bedroom as a second hangout space. The first 3 years on my own were the hardest years of my life. I am not exaggerating that. I had a salary that barely covered rent and my loan payments, a car that needed repairs I couldn't always afford, and zero financial cushion. I ate the same 4 meals on rotation. I picked up freelance work on nights and weekends. I said no to things I wanted because I could not afford them. I said yes to things I didn't want because they paid. I built a budget that I tracked down to the last dollar every single week, and I stuck to it when it was painful, which was often. By the time I was 28, I had paid off one of my 3 loans, had a small emergency fund, and had gotten 2 promotions at work. I was a project manager at a mid-sized construction firm, and I was good at it. Really good at it. I had a reputation for coming in under budget and ahead of schedule, and my manager had started pulling me into meetings I was technically too junior to be in. My personal life was quieter. I had a small group of friends, a routine I liked, and a growing sense that I had made the right choice leaving Ohio when I did. I visited home for holidays. Thanksgiving was always tense. Christmas was always tense. I learned to keep the visits short and to drive my own car so I could leave when I needed to. During those years, my family's calls were predictable. My mother would call to complain about something. My father would call to ask if I was doing okay in a way that meant he wasn't really listening to the answer. And every few months, one of them would mention Kyle, who had dropped out of his college after 2 semesters, who had tried and quit 3 different jobs, who was still living at home at 23, then 24, then 25. They didn't say it directly, but the implication was always there. That I had so much, that Kyle was struggling, that maybe I could help. I sent money twice, $200 once, $300 another time, because Kyle told my mother he needed help with a car repair and my mother called me and made it sound like a crisis. Kyle never said thank you. He never acknowledged it. When I mentioned it casually in a conversation months later, he looked at me blankly, like he had genuinely forgotten. I stopped sending money after that. I kept saving. I kept working. I started researching the housing market in a way that felt obsessive, but was actually just necessary. I had been renting for 6 years, and I was tired of paying someone else's mortgage. I found a neighborhood I liked, ran the numbers 20 different ways, and decided I could do it if I was careful. I spent 4 months looking. I put in 3 offers before one was accepted. The day I got the keys, I sat in the empty living room for about an hour. I didn't call anyone. I just sat there on the floor and let the quiet sink in. It was mine. The floors, the walls, the small backyard with the overgrown hedge. I would eventually trim myself. Mine. I told my parents about it at Thanksgiving that year, 3 weeks after I had already moved in. I didn't tell them before because I knew how the conversation would go, and I wanted a few weeks of just knowing it was mine before that conversation happened. My mother's reaction was exactly what I expected. She smiled tightly and said, "That's nice, Sarah." My father asked how much it had cost. Kyle, who was 26 and still at home, asked if I had a guest bedroom. I drove home that night feeling like I always did after family visits, hollowed out in a specific way that took a few days to refill. Things were quiet for about a year after that. My parents still called. Kyle was apparently working at a warehouse now, which my mother described as a setback. I kept my head down and focused on work. I got another promotion. I started maxing out my retirement contributions. I repainted the kitchen on a long weekend in April and felt something close to pure satisfaction when I stood back and looked at it. Then my parents asked to come visit. They had never visited before. In 3 years of me owning the house, they had never come. I said yes because what was I going to say no? They drove up on a Saturday, and I cleaned the whole house the night before and tried to feel normal about it. My mother walked through every room with her arms folded. My father nodded at things. Kyle came too, which I had not been told about in advance. Kyle walked through the house differently than my parents. He wasn't folding his arms. He was looking at things like he was calculating something. He opened the closet in the guest room. He looked at the backyard for a long time through the sliding door. We had lunch. My mother made comments about my dish towels. My father asked about the neighborhood. Kyle said almost nothing until we were finishing coffee, and then he looked at me and said, "You've got a lot of space here for one person." I said, "I like having space." He nodded slowly. My parents exchanged a look I had seen before. The kind of look that means a conversation is about to happen that has already been decided. My mother said, "We actually wanted to talk to you about something." I put down my coffee cup. She said they had been thinking. Kyle was at a point in his life where he really needed stability. He was looking at apartment listings and nothing was affordable. The warehouse job didn't pay enough. He needed a foundation, a real one, and they had been thinking that maybe I could help. I asked what help meant. My father pulled out a folder, an actual folder with papers in it. He had printed out information about property equity loans and what it looks like to add a co-owner to a deed. He said they weren't asking me to give Kyle the house, just half. Add his name to the deed as a co-owner so he had something real, something he could leverage. He could even pay me rent, they said. It would be good for both of us. I stared at the folder for a long moment. I said, "You want me to give my brother half of my house?" My mother said, "Co-ownership isn't." I said, "I want to make sure I understand what you're asking. You want me to split ownership of the house that I bought, that I saved for, that I pay the mortgage on every single month, with someone who was not on the loan and contributed nothing to the purchase." My father said they were family. That family helps each other. I looked at Kyle. He was looking at his coffee cup. I said, "Kyle, did you ask for this?" He shrugged. He said, "It would help." I said, "No." My mother said, "Sarah." I said, "No." My mother said, "Sarah." I said, "No." There was a silence that lasted about 15 seconds and felt like 15 minutes. Then my mother said the thing I had been waiting for my whole life. The thing that I think she had been holding in reserve for exactly this moment. She said that if I was going to be this way, if I was going to be selfish and think only about myself and refuse to help my own brother when I had more than enough, then maybe I wasn't the daughter she thought I was. Maybe I needed to think about what family really meant. Maybe I needed to think about whether I wanted to keep being part of this family at all. She said, "You should think very carefully about this." My father nodded. Kyle was still looking at his coffee cup. I said, "Okay, I've thought about it. The answer is still no." My mother said that was disappointing. My father said they hadn't raised me to be like this. Kyle stood up and said he was going to wait in the car. My mother asked me one more time, and I said one more time, no, and she picked up her purse and walked out. My father followed. I stood in my own kitchen and listened to their car pull out of my driveway. I called my closest friend from college that night, a woman I have known since we were 19, and I told her everything. She listened to the whole thing without interrupting, and when I was done, she said, "Okay, before you do anything else, call your mortgage company Monday morning." I asked why. She said, "Because you need to know if there's any way they could interfere, legally. Like, could they make any kind of claim? Is there anything in how the house is titled that leaves any opening?" I had not thought about that. I was a project manager. I was good at logistics, but I had not thought about this particular logistics problem. I spent Sunday on the phone with a friend of a friend who worked in real estate law asking questions. The answer was no. There was no legal mechanism by which my parents could force a deed transfer. My name was on the deed and only my name. But I called my mortgage company Monday morning anyway, as my friend suggested, and I flagged that I had a family situation and asked whether I needed to do anything to protect the title. The woman I spoke to was calm and helpful. She walked me through what a title lock was and how it worked. I set one up that week. I also called my bank. I changed which family members could be listed as emergency contacts on any account. It was a small thing, maybe a symbolic thing, but it felt necessary. My mother called twice that week. I let it go to voicemail. She left messages that shifted in tone between the two. The first was hurt and disappointed. The second was more pointed, more like an ultimatum delivered in installments. She said she hoped I was thinking about what I had done. She said Kyle was really struggling. She said she had always tried to treat her children equally and she didn't know where I had gotten the idea that things were unfair. I listened to both messages once and then did not listen to them again. My father texted me. He said, "Just think about it. That's all we're asking." I did not reply. The following month, there was a family event, my aunt and uncle's anniversary party, a big one, a lot of extended family, people I actually liked and hadn't seen in a couple of years. I went. Of course my parents were there. Of course Kyle was there. My mother hugged me at the door like nothing had happened. My father shook my hand. Kyle nodded at me from across the room and got himself a drink. I spent most of the party talking to my aunt, who had always been one of my favorite people, and my cousin, who had moved to Portland and was doing something interesting with sustainable architecture. It was a genuinely good evening, right up until about an hour before the end, when my mother found me near the dessert table and stood next to me and said quietly, "Have you changed your mind?" I said, "No." She said, "You could at least think about a loan. You give him a loan from the equity, he pays you back. That's still helping." I said, "I'm not doing that either." She said, "What kind of person?" I said, "Mom, I'm not doing this here. This is not the place." She said, "When is the place?" She said, "When is the place?" "You won't return calls." I said, "I've been clear. I'm going to stay clear. I'm not changing my answer." She walked away. A few minutes later, I saw her whispering to my father, who glanced over at me. I ate my piece of cake and talked to my cousin until it was time to leave. In the car on the way home, I made a decision. Not a dramatic one, not a big moment, just a quiet, clear settling. I was going to stop waiting for them to understand. I had spent years, my whole life, really waiting for some version of this family where the rules were fair, where what I built was respected, where I existed as a person and not a resource. That version was not coming. I had been very patient. I had been patient for 29 years, and I was done being patient. I did not send a long message. I did not write an email listing every grievance. I thought about it, and then I decided that wasn't what I wanted to do. I called my mother the following Sunday and I said 3 things. I said I was not giving Kyle anything. Not a co-ownership, not a loan, not money, nothing. I said I needed a significant amount of time and distance from this family and I was going to take it. I said I loved her and I was hanging up now. She started to say something and I said, "I love you, goodbye." And I hung up. She called back 4 times. I did not answer. I let it go to voicemail and did not listen to the messages for 2 weeks. When I finally did listen, there were 3 from my mother and 1 from my father. My mother's messages moved through hurt, then anger, then something that sounded almost like sadness. My father's message was short. He said he hoped I knew what I was doing. He said he hoped I wouldn't regret it. I have not regretted it. That was almost 2 years ago. I have spoken to my parents twice since then. Once on the phone at Christmas because I called, briefly, because I chose to, and once when my father had a minor health scare and I called to check in. Both conversations were short. Both were civil. Neither of them mentioned Kyle. Neither of them mentioned the house. Kyle and I do not speak. My aunt reached out a few months after everything happened. She did not take sides. She said she didn't fully understand what had gone on, but she could see that I seemed to be doing well, and she was glad. I appreciated that. I told her a little bit of the story, not all of it, and she listened and said, "I've always thought you were tougher than people gave you credit for." I've thought about that a lot. The house is mine. All of it. I finished the backyard project I had been putting off, pulled out the overgrown hedge, laid some flagstone, put in a few raised planting beds. I spend a lot of evenings out there when the weather is good. I got a small table and 2 chairs because sometimes my friend comes over and we sit outside and talk for a long time. I still have the folder my father brought to that lunch. I kept it because I thought someday I might want to remember exactly what they asked. It's in the bottom drawer of my desk. I don't look at it, but I know it's there, and knowing it's there reminds me that I made the right call. Not because what they asked was the worst thing anyone has ever done. I know that in the grand scale of family dysfunction, it's not. But because of what it confirmed, that my name on something had never meant to them what it meant to me, that my work was always, in their calculation, available to be redistributed, not anymore. If you're watching this and you've been through something like this, a family that sees your success as a resource they're owed, I want you to hear something clearly. The guilt is real. The grief of accepting that the family you have is not the family you needed, that is real too. I am not going to tell you it doesn't hurt, because it does. It still does, sometimes, in specific quiet moments. But so does the alternative. So does staying. So does slowly signing away the things you built because saying no felt too dangerous. I chose the hurt that lives outside the house I earned. I did not choose the hurt of watching someone else's name go on the deed. You get to choose which hurt you carry. Choose the one you can live with. There's something nobody tells you about building a life from nothing, that the people who benefited least from your struggle will sometimes feel the most entitled to your success. I didn't understand that for a long time. I thought if I worked hard enough, was patient enough, was quiet enough, things would eventually balance out. They didn't. And I think that's the first honest lesson I can offer anyone watching this. Waiting for fairness from people who have never offered it is not patience. It's a habit. And habits can be broken. What happened to me wasn't random. Looking back with clear eyes, I can trace every step. The choices my parents made when I was 7, 12, 16, those choices created a pattern. And patterns, when they go unaddressed long enough, become expectations. My brother didn't invent his entitlement. It was handed to him carefully, year after year, by people who thought they were loving him. What they were actually doing was building a person who could not stand on his own, and then pointing him towards someone who could. That is not love. That is the opposite of love, wearing love's face. I spent years absorbing the cost of that pattern, not because I was weak, I want to be clear about that, but because I genuinely believed the narrative I had been handed, that I was the capable one, so I should carry more. That asking for fairness was selfish. That needing recognition for what I had built was somehow petty. None of that was true. It was just a story that benefited everyone except me, and I had been repeating it so long I had started to mistake it for my own voice. The moment I sat in my living room holding that deed transfer, something shifted. Not anger. I want to be precise here, something cleaner than anger. Clarity. I saw the whole pattern at once, all the way back to childhood, and I understood that the folder my father had printed out was not a new request. It was the same request that had always been made of me, just finally written down on paper. Saying no was the most intelligent thing I have ever done. Not because it punished anyone. I don't believe in building a life around punishing people, but because it was the first decision I made that was entirely mine, grounded in reality, not guilt, in what I had actually earned, not what I was told I owed. Intelligence isn't only about what you know. It's about being honest enough to see a situation for what it is, even when seeing it clearly costs you something. The grief was real. I will not pretend otherwise. There is a specific kind of grief that comes from accepting that the family you needed and the family you have are not the same thing. I sat with that grief. I let it be what it was, and then I got up and trimmed the hedge in my backyard and made dinner in my kitchen and slept in my house, and the next morning I got up and did it again. That is what resilience actually looks like. Not the version where you feel nothing, the The version where you feel everything and keep going anyway. You build something, you protect it, you refuse to apologize for either, and slowly, steadily, the life you chose begins to feel more like home than the one you were born into ever did.